In this instructional video, I'm going to show you how I would revise the draft that I wrote of my thesis in order to make it more clear and specific and start being able to write a thesis paragraph. So my first step is that I'm going to read my draft of my thesis over again, and I'm going to circle things that seem vague or unclear to me, things that I might need to define or make more specific. Okay. Bronte is promoting that women need to be different and not go by society. Bronte is promoting. The thing I'm wondering is, what does promoting mean? And how is Bronte promoting? What does promoting mean? How is Bronte promoting change? What parts of Jane Eyre, what parts of the story would promote change? Bronte is promoting that women need to be different. So I also want to know, what do I mean by different? What does different mean? And then I'm also wondering, like, what were women like to begin with? How do I know what women were like during the Victorian era? Bronte is promoting that women need to be different and not go by society. What does it mean to not go by society? So now I have some questions that I've asked myself about the draft of my thesis, and now I'm going to try to answer those questions, and those answers will become my thesis paragraph.
All right, Ms. Kaplan, so we have a good list of questions here. So we're going to go through and try and answer them.
Okay.
So our first question was, how is Bronte promoting? What does that word mean?
So I think promoting is like, how is Bronte encouraging women to break away from traditions during the Victorian era?
So I'm going to type, I think this, so how is Bronte encouraging women to break from tradition?
Yeah.
From traditional gender roles?
Yeah, from traditional gender roles. And I think maybe it's important to say something about how it's not just Bronte encouraging the women, but like something about through the novel, like
Yeah.
through writing the novel.
So let's change that then. So how does Bronte's novel, Jane Eyre, encourage women, okay, to break away from traditional gender roles during the Victorian period? So do we want to leave this as a question, or do we want to turn this into a sentence?
So I guess if we were going to turn it into a sentence, we would just take how does out.
Okay.
Bronte's novel, Jane Eyre, encourages women to break away from traditional gender roles.
Alright, so let me get rid of that. So Bronte's novel, Jane Eyre, encourages women to break away from traditional gender roles during the Victorian period. This is a nice opening sentence.
So,
It has a strong claim, and I understand what this person's going to argue. This is good.
Start.
so our second question is, what is it about Jane Eyre's story that encourages women to be different?
Right. So I'm thinking about the whole book here. Not the ending, I don't want to ruin the ending for anyone yet. But one thing I think about is that Jane ends up at Rochester's house, and she could easily marry him, but she decides she has to be her own independent woman and go out in the world and make a living. I'm thinking, does this encourage women to be different?
I think it could, because part of that decision was like when she finds out about Bertha Mason and she doesn't want to be Rochester's mistress, that he's pressuring her to do that anyways, and it seems like her personal like values are that like she doesn't want to be a mistress, and I feel like she makes her own decision in that moment.
Okay, so I'm going to start typing, just so we can have something down on paper. When Jane's personal values are put at risk, she makes independent choices? Or she makes independent choices that are not typical for women during the Victorian period?
Mm-hmm.
Of women. What do you think of that?
Should we add something about like she makes independent choices rather than
If I could
allowing
spell
her
Victorian period.
rather than allowing her choices to be
I think that's all right.
Okay.
So I'm going to, rather than allowing our choices to be influenced, could I just write by men? By a man?
Yeah, by men, because then we
By
can give
men.
other examples like John Rivers.
That are not, right, oops, that are not typical of women during the Victorian period. This seems like a good sentence.
Yeah.
All right, perfect. So Ms. Kaplan, I'm looking back through our sentence. When Jane's personal values are put at risk, she makes independent choices rather than allowing her choices to be influenced by men that are not typical of women during the Victorian period. I think we need an example.
Yeah, I think we need to add something about the example that we were talking about earlier about becoming Rochester's mistress.
So after this, could we write, for example,
Okay.
and then what were you thinking of when she?
When Jane is faced with the decision to become Mr. Rochester's mistress. And then I kind of think we're going to end up repeating everything that we already have. So maybe we could just put this as the beginning of this sentence, right?
Oh.
When Jane
Okay.
is faced with the decision to become Mr. Rochester's mistress, Jane's personal values are put at risk,
Period.
period. Ultimately, she makes an independent choice, because we're talking about one choice.
Yes, she makes an independent choice.
choice.
Rather than allowing her choices to be influenced by Rochester.
Mm-hmm.
Let's stop there. I think we need a new sentence now.
I think so.
This type of independence is not typical of women during the Victorian period. For women? Of women. During the Victorian period. This is nice.
Yeah, I
It
think we
captures
can-
our idea, but we still were able to make a more specific
Yeah.
claim.
And I think if we move on to our next question, it will help us become more specific about independence during the Victorian time period.